You've been busy.
I have
You've
been.
been busy.
Yes.
So tell us. We're going to get into all the fun stuff you're doing at Qualys and some. I'm a risk nerd, so this topic excites me. You probably don't understand why I'm a risk nerd, but
You need to get out more.
that's very true. Absolutely. So we're going to nerd out on risk, but you've had a lot in your career that I think is important to touch on here. So maybe kind of a brief history of some of the things you've worked on that led you to Qualys.
Sure. First of all, this is my second stint at Qualys. So I was here 20 years ago. I was a Midland engineer, as was Sumed, who was our CEO.
Right.
I left to become a serial recovering CISO. He stayed at Qualys. Obviously, if I would have stayed, I would be CEO now. Everybody knows that.
That's right.
That's a joke, by the way.
Make that statement now. Yeah.
Yes, but most recently I was a chief risk officer for a cyber insurance company by the name of Resilience, still an advisor there. Prior to that, a variety of CISO gigs. Started out as an engineer building security solutions. Actually, my first security gig was building vulnerability management stuff and IDS stuff. That's now getting off 25 plus years ago.
Right.
And along the way, I happened to author a couple books. Actually, the first one I co-authored with Doug Hubbard called How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity Risk.
Right.
Despite the long, gangly title and pea green cover, it's become a very popular book. We didn't realize this, but we wrote the equivalent of Stairway to Heaven for risk management. We didn't plan that. But I'll just say on that book, it's the main curriculum for the Department of Defense CISO program here in the U.S. It's curriculum graduates.
A lot of universities too.
Harvard, Brown, Berkeley, several others. It was required reading by the Society of Actuaries Exam Prep, and actuaries off the hook parties there. And so I wrote a second book called The Metrics Manifesto, Confronting Security Data. I'm in the process right now of writing a third book called The Risk Therapist's Handbook.
That's a mouthful, and I'm sure lots of stuff inside that.
Yeah. So that's probably more than you want to know about me, but that's kind of
that's good. I think it paints a good picture for folks. Some of the things you've been up to. Let's just jump right in. So when we had a quick call to kind of talk through some of the things we're going to cover, and you described the Risk Operations Center.
Yes.
And I was like, that sounds cool. I like risk.
Yeah.
I like the topic of this. I don't like taking on risk. But just the idea that there's a program and a team coming together, looking at risk, I presume in real time, is exciting to me because I think organizations need to have that view. So tell us what's going on. This is the Qualys solution. Tell us more about it.
Sure. So I suppose I'll make a couple of epiphanies of the obvious here on the Risk Operations Center. So we started as a company, we've got 12,000, 13,000 customers. We've got a lot of the Fortune level companies. And what we started observing and what we started hearing as requests was, look, we're bringing all this asset data into our data warehouses, be it Snowflake, be it into Databricks or whatever it is, you pick your poison. They're bringing in threat data, they're bringing in asset data, they're bringing in vulnerability data, full stack data. And it's soul-crushing do-it-yourself work. It's incredibly expensive. You have to have pretty talented staff.
Right.
You're essentially building a software organization when your job actually is to do security, right?
Right.
Not to say that that's not security work, but it becomes unsustainable for these companies. So we were observing them for the last decade doing this. They were asking for help, and lo and behold, we realized, gosh, we're actually pretty good at that. Why don't we open up to, we already had some third-party integrations. Why don't we open that up to whatever our customers need? The average customer has 70 different sorts of security sources. Why not bring that in? We're already really good at rationalizing assets or normalizing assets. We're already very good with the scoring thing. How do you normalize assets, rationalize scores, so that together, so that our customers can be more effective and more efficient at actually buying down that risk, not just observing it, but actually taking remedial action, taking mitigation action, or be able to say, hey, if we take this action, would that plausibly be destructive, so that we can actually be thoughtful as we go about and change the environment. So the risk operations center is a concept of bringing in massive amounts of data, sewing it together. And I'm going to tell you more about it, but I want to stop there and give you a chance to react.
Yeah, my mind's going a million miles an hour here. So you described it just now, leading with pulling in data.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, is that the starting points to what you're offering with the Risk Operations Center? Or is it we have a strategy and we know where we want to be? What do we need? And what do we need to look at to achieve our strategy? Or is it both directional? Talk to me about how that engagement looks like.
So again, going back, I think to what I mentioned before is, making an observation about the challenges our customer and the broader industry were having. Like, okay, you need this, you want this, you're spending the big ones, multi-millions of dollars. And then when you have an employee or two or three or four leave or churn, all of a sudden, this do-it-yourself, I call it death march, just to be, I suppose, dramatic and exciting, it's just not sustainable, right? And so they're asking for help. And then for us, it was
a tactical driver.
Yeah, well, it's just like there's a need, and our business is to help our customers, obviously. But part of that too was this, and the industry calls it CRQ, and I might have been responsible for that. I don't know. It's not my favorite turn of phrase, but the reality is that, hey, look, we not only need to bring all this telemetry, we need to be able to focus on those things that really matter to the business. And the term is, of course, asset. Asset, I suppose, is a proxy for value. Your digital assets they're both persisting and moving value, through the business. And so that became really important. And I guess I'll just say this, going back again to the telemetry, that we really see the need for a kind of a fungible data plane. I don't mean to get overly nerdy for the audience, but we realized that customers, they had sort of stream data, stream analytics is necessary. Right. We were already doing Kafka stuff. I think a lot of people are. We were doing it at massive scale. We already had a petabyte scale data lake. So we were already doing OLTP and OLAP, online analytical processing, time series. So for change and making forecasting, we were already doing that. And then I'd add graph in there too. Graph, not just for attack path, but understanding how does identity, by the way, which we treat as an asset. Right. So, by the way, I'll just say on assets, this is maybe obvious to you and maybe obvious to a lot of listeners. The only thing that modern assets really have in common is they're all nouns, right? They're all nouns. I'll add one more piece of sauce to that. Is another thing assets have in common is they typically have a start state and a last known state. So you have these two timestamps. I know it's getting really nerdy, but it's important when you think about how you want to persist data. And so you're dealing with ephemeral assets. A modern asset can be more like an event, but it has a begin state and an end state in terms of change. That change might be it goes away, spins down, or there might be some other change to that state in terms of identities that are provisioned, who knows what. So you need a plane, what we call a data plane, that's able to accommodate all that. So again, when we think about the Risk Operations Center, I think there is a necessity to have an expressive and powerful data plane that allows you to accommodate what I call a rich concept of value. Again, our industry calls it asset, but it's really value, because then you can start talking about how do I prioritize, that, let's say, for example, an agent is an asset. An agentic workflow is an asset. Agentic workflow that's doing retrieval augmented generation to a bunch of SaaS services. That's all an asset composed of assets, right? Then there's the identities that are associated with that, both machine-oriented identities and the human identities.
Yes.
There's the committing of code, and then there's the third-party, Python libraries and all that stuff. You're getting into a large set of assets and then associated heuristics. So that's just an observation of reality, and observing what the customers needed, and then just observing where the world is. It became absolutely incumbent upon us to be able to respond to it. We couldn't just sit there and say, okay, well, that seems complex. So hence the creation of the Risk Operations Center. We can talk more about cyber risk quantification adds in there as well.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. I want to talk
that was a lot, by the way. I'm sorry about that.
I think it's important to lay that groundwork there. Let's talk about this data plane, because as you're describing, I'm trying to think of who's sitting in front of what, or who's being alerted or triggered to some change of state that says something has to be done, a business decision has to be made, or we're about to hit a threshold for something, we have a chance to get ahead of it now if we do something.
Right.
So with the data plane in mind, and now maybe I'm overcomplicating or oversimplifying, or neither.
Well,
But
I already did that apparently.
I think I'm going to help you then.
All right.
So I guess I'm trying to figure out who's doing what
Right.
in this world of Risk Operations Center. I think people probably have a pretty good sense of the SOC analyst and the different levels and what they do, and they might write some code and they might do some hunting. They're certainly responsible for response and perhaps even tangled up in the recovery. So what does that Risk Operations Center world look like in terms of roles and who's looking at what, who's responding, who's hunting? I don't know.
So there are people who will make a distinction between a SOC and a Risk Operations Center. I'm going to go at your question starting there.
Okay.
Perhaps even some people in my own company will do that. But a SOC is purely attack surface oriented. We have this $250 billion industry, whatever it is, called security.
Yeah.
It's very attack surface oriented, right? So idea with a SOC is, hey, we're trying to find out if there's compromise. You can have compromise all day long. If there's no value at risk though, associated with that compromise, it means nothing. So if there is value at risk with compromise, you have some sort of impact. But there's still more to the story. If you've transferred that risk away, be it either through insurance or capital reserves or otherwise, again, you can take that hit to the groin, a hit to the throat, and punch to the solar plex, and still be able to deliver value to your stakeholders, right? So now you're getting into this area called risk service. Now, I want to make I guess I'm going to make an epiphany at the obvious. I say it a lot, obvious things. Bad guys are interested in treasure. Mm-hmm. Bad guys are treasure hunters. Your CFO, your board, your CEO, by the way, they are also interested in treasure. The bad guys love it that we in security practice are exclusively, though, focused on attack surface only. We're not concerned with value at risk. We're not thinking enough about that. But that's what the bad guys, that's all they think about. I mean, yes, you have some of the folks who just want to do chaos. I get that. But, bad guys who have to still send their kids to college and pay rent.
They're looking to make a living.
Fund their 401k, whatnot. So, they are interested in treasure, as is your business. So there's this area called risk surface, which is just an observation of reality that you have to understand what the actual value of these assets. Again, I've got a very fungible concept of asset now, given that data point. So the people who are, you'd say, looking at it, you can still have your SOC responding to angry packets there. Some of them are flapping against your firewall. Some of them are leading to compromise. But the question then is, who's ensuring that we understand as the, again, what is a successful business? It's a digitally and AI transforming business, but that business, successful business, is in the business of exposing more value to more people, through more channels, at higher velocities for the hopes of more revenue, more profits. I'll say it again, Ali, you can say it faster because it's fun to say. A successful business is in the business of exposing more value to more people, to more channels, at higher velocities, with the hopes of more revenue, more profits. So a successful business is rapidly changing, particularly now in light of AI. So your SOC people aren't involved in thinking about that at all. They can respond again to the the time series change that's associated with threat, but we have this broader context now that we want to be aware of. And what we are looking to do with the Risk Operations Center, by the way, by and large, is not increase the number of people who have to be looking at that. So to the extent possible, we want to be able to eliminate as much of that risk surface as humanly possible. That includes, by the way, concepts of mitigation, remediation, mitigation, and transfer. I know that's a lot. Read my book.
Read the book. How does risk you listed off the 5 things of a successful business. It's the last one, so it stuck with me as well. But profits. I can easily see a connection of unmanaged risk or poorly managed risk taking a huge hit at profit. What other, is that the main one that companies focus on, or can risk impact some of the other things, and do they think about that?
So this is getting into like CISO boardroom kind of thing. But so again, the bad guys would love nothing more than for CISOs and their teams to focus exclusively on attack surface. That means they're not focused on treasure. The inference is if you're good at controlling your attack surface, you're good at protecting your treasure, but you actually haven't done that yet.
Right.
You've done all the security things. We haven't looked at risk. And I'm in a privileged position that I travel around the world and talk to the CISOs and others about this all day long. And this whole event is this whole RSA thing is attack surface focus.
Are CISOs being trained and guided by things like this event to stay focused on ASM?
Well, I believe your CEO, your board, or your CFO wants the CISOs to be strategic and think about what matters to the business.
Right.
I mean, your CFO and your CEO, they wake up and eat risk for breakfast. They're thinking about M&A. They're thinking about lawsuits. They're thinking about profitability. They're thinking about forecasts. They're thinking about real business. They eat real risk for breakfast all day long. So don't think you're the only one who does that. It's far more complex and the stakes are much higher what they're dealing with typically on a day in and day out basis. They really want you to think that way. They want you to be able to think about lying down risk, yes, with controls. They want you to think about transfer to insurance as an option. Your CFO would be surprised, would probably welcome you talking about the growth of residual risk and what that might mean on your capital reserves if you had risk that perhaps somehow exceeded your limit in insurance. Now you may think, I can never think about that. Your business wants you to think that way. They don't know how to tell you or ask you. My second publicly traded CISO gig, they said they wanted a strategic CISO. I said, I think I'm that, but let me tell you, what would you see occurring that lets you know I'm being strategic? You know what they said? Literally, this is like people on the board. We'd see you doing strategy. I said, all right. What do you mean by that? Well, you'd be strategic. They knew they wanted something. They wanted something. They just didn't know how to articulate it. But it's certainly what they're saying is, I don't want you, yes, patch the machines, do that stuff. There's a bigger, this is 10 years ago, by the way, there's a bigger world out there. We're a publicly traded company. We need you locking elbows with the GC, with the CFO, and looking at the business and ensuring that we're resilient, in the broader sense of resilient, and plausible future loss. Meaning if we take a hit, we can still service our various stakeholders.
Let me ask this:
By the way, you're going to edit this stuff up, right? Make it all fancy.
Oh, it's going to be down to 2 minutes. I'm going to cut all this stuff.
Good.
No, we're leaving it as it is, my friend. Let me ask you this: is the goal of the Risk Operations Center to enable these conversations to take place? And I know we're going to ultimately kind of bridge the gap between the technical and the control-based, and that back to the leadership team, back to the business and board. But is one of the goals to? Yeah, I don't know.
Conversations are good. We want to have conversations. The goal is. So I'll say this, and this is going to make a lot of you hardened CISOs and risk people vomit in your mouths. Are you ready? The goal is to eliminate business risk. Now, let me tell you why people just hacked up some stuff. Because the word eliminate sounds very deterministic, right? And risk, the definition of risk hinges in part on uncertainty, right? So risk is a state of uncertainty where some of the possibilities could lead to loss, catastrophe, or some other undesirable outcome. That's a textbook. Well, I wrote that book, and that's a quote from it, but that's the definition of risk. And so then you have eliminate. Eliminate, actually, by the way, it's interesting. It's a Latin word. L means out. Eliminate means limit. Out to a limit. So the idea actually, originally that word meant pushing something bad out to a limit. So it definitely relates to
not a to zero.
It never meant that. Yeah. We just, we take good things and turn them into meaningless blather. So, but anyways, the idea is though to push to the extent possible, automate as much of this as humanly and computationally possible. So to be able to do automated patching, to do mitigation, maybe in terms of memory control, dynamic configurations, things like that. And or if there's going to be a human in the middle, make that workflow with AI and whatnot, make that as easy as possible for there has to be a checker verifier to reduce the amount of effort to do that, to keep the overarching risk system in check.
Right. All right. So let me ask this then. Conversations are good. Action is better, driven by information. What does success look like? Because I want to talk metrics here a little bit as well. Who defines success? What does it look like? And how do we know that we're running our risk operations center to actually eliminate business risk?
That's a great question. So what is success? People typically think something's a good decision if there's a good outcome. The reality is people make bad decisions and have great outcomes all day long. People drive home incredibly drunk and are successful when they get home. Oh, therefore that must have been a good decision. But there's all kinds of business examples just like that.
Yep.
Just series of awful decisions that end up being tremendously great outcomes. The question is, have you taken into consideration what the business actually stands to lose, and have you been both capitally and operationally efficient in protecting them? My argument is that's what a risk operations center really does. It's about balance. It's balancing your need for accuracy and precision in terms of telemetry. Really, lots of telemetry, trying to get certainty given data, that's expensive. Trying to get as much accuracy, precision, called relative certainty, in buying down the risk that could be negatively impactful to business objectives. I want to be able to say, okay, have we spent the appropriate amount of money on controls, on transfer in the form of insurance and even capital reserve to ensure that if there was one or more concurrent plausible negative events, that we would still be able to fulfill our obligations to our multiple stakeholders. And so that's what I want to understand. It was the plan effectively implemented. Now, if you say, well, but we still got hacked. Well, that's going back to the idea, well, I drove home drunk and made it, therefore, or I didn't make it, therefore that was a bad decision, right? So that's ultimately, how do we know it's successful? Are you being both capitally and operationally efficient in protecting business objectives?
Okay.
And again, security people don't think this way because they're focused on attack surface only.
Well,
we need to focus on treasure.
That's actually where I was going to go. So who is driving the need to have a risk operations center?
Well, going back to my original salvo is our customers. We're seeing them already do this. They're already
who in the organization? So is it the board saying we need to have a different view of this? We're running blind, or is it the CISO? My next question, so you know, is if the CISO wants to have better control, more strategic over their own programs and the risk that they carry on their own shoulders,
right?
What can they? Who do they talk to about this, and who are the key stakeholders and who's driving things?
A board member, unless they're a recovering CISO themselves or whatnot, would never ask for a risk operations center. They wouldn't know to ask that. Again, the CISO, CFO, and board, they want the CISO to be more strategic. They don't know how to act. Like an example of, well, just do more strategy. What does that look like in being strategic? Like it's a circular conversation. What we're observing again is that we have double-digit percentage of companies, typically the well-funded ones, who have these massive do-it-yourself projects where they're bringing in all this data to try to do this. And you might say, well, how do you know that? I'm here doing 2 community workshops, sold out. I'm traveling on the road. I have CISOs from Fortune 100 companies and others showing up to get training to learn this. They want this stuff. They're recognizing the need for it. It's just very different, right? So again, they're investing millions of dollars in data warehouse, data lakes, or data lake house, whatever cool kids are calling it these days. They're hiring tons of staff to try to answer these questions. Where's my value at risk? What's the value of my inline versus my host-based controls? As the sign of very boring.
No, that's the sign that we're being kicked out of this podcast booth here in a moment. But
we're bottom line, we're very customer driven.
Yeah. No, that's very obvious and very clear, but also very thoughtful in how you certainly look at it. And I'm sure they would say very thoughtful in how you engage with them on this topic. And I feel like we just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
But so maybe there's more chats ahead with you, Richard, because again, I love nerding out on this, and I ask my questions out of pure curiosity, and hopefully the nuggets came through, and others are thinking, how do I manage my risk, and am I doing it in a way that makes sense for my business, and saving some money perhaps, instead of blowing it on huge data lakes.
Well, they're doing it.
Yeah.
The empirical evidence is there. So.
Richard, fantastic to see you, man.
Likewise. Thanks
so
much.
For the chats. Everybody, stay connected to Qualys. Pay attention to what they're doing with the Risk Operations Center. Connect with Richard. Grab some of his books while you're at it. And we'll see everybody on the next one.